Welcome, everyone. It's a special episode here at notinhallofame.com where I've got my good friend from, well, buddy, I don't know what to say, Paul Lawrence. I mean, like, we are Canadians living in the United States, but I never gave up my maple syrup. You're about to do that.
Yes, after 25 years here living in the US, my wife and I are taking the oath to become US citizens here in a few days. It's sort of mixed feelings about it, but the reality is we're here. Our kids are going to grow up and live here. We're going to retire here. We're obviously have friends and family back in Canada, but our roots are really here in Ohio, and so it just made
Mhm.
sense to do that. And as we know in this crazy world we live in, for those of us who'd like to travel, even go back to Canada or other travel, being a U.S. citizen is just a better status than continue as a
Keep
permanent
your
resident.
Canadian passport, though, when you go to Europe, because they won't spit in your beer.
There's that.
Yeah.
Well, when we travel, I probably will not, walk around with all my, U.S. flag gear everywhere. Probably most Americans also kind of let's downplay that.
There is a certain reality to that, but
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
But I asked Paul, my good friend Paul, to join me today because there's something I've been doing here on Not Hall of Fame for a few years, and I call it it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame Monitor. It's the same thing that Pro Football Reference does, where they look at a lot of players and they say, here's their Hall of Fame monitor. They do that for baseball and other stuff like that. I do the same thing, and what I do is I itemize it. I actually have 150. Right now, it's only 100 on the site, but I asked Paul to go with me through the top 30. We're going to go 30 to 1, and this is the preseason. Obviously, we're recording this with the week one in the books. So things have already fluctuated, but I only update it annually. And here's how I do this, Paul, and I'm not sure if you know how I do it.
I
I
don't. So give us the criteria and
Okay.
your mental map on all
Well,
this.
yeah, my mental math, and you can call it mental, and I'm fine. And I told Paul before we went on, and I said, Paul, if you think that I'm wrong on something, tell me. I don't care. I mean, like, my skin is thicker than a Snicker. It's fine. You can hit me with it, and I'm not going to take offense to it. And that goes for all of you all listening too. If you think that I've got something wrong, if you got something right, that's fine. Just please don't open with, it's a joke that,
Yeah,
you know, I'm all for constructive criticism.
sure.
It is the backbone of a lot of what I've done. And we have our little football chat group. A couple of people, Brian's really good at constructive criticism. He's given me a few of that, and I've taken that to heart, and it's been beneficial. So, but what I try to do is I try to incorporate a baseball system like Jaws. Now,
Yep.
it's flawed, like every stat is, because what Jaws does is it looks at your top peak by position. So I try to incorporate that in football. And for some positions, it works better than others. Quarterback is not that position. If
Right.
you look at the last five quarterbacks who got in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I can compare the stats to Troy Aikman and Matthew Stafford. And if I just say, hey, here's A, here's B, you're going to think that Matthew Stafford is much better quarterback. Obviously, that's not the case. But in a running back, it's different. In a wide receiver, it's different. Offensive lineman, it's different, and so on and so forth. So we have to keep that in consideration. But also a quarterback that wins the Super Bowl means a whole lot more than an offensive lineman that wins the Super Bowl. So I try to play along with that, and it's all over the board. Make sense?
Yep, makes sense to me.
All
And
right.
and you're right. I mean, there's a lot of criteria, and a lot of it is subjective, and we have stats and comparisons. We can adjust somewhat for errors, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned the quarterbacks today, and it's just the post sort of 2000s is a lot different than the players prior to that. You have to adjust for that. But at some point, it's subjective, but you also need to have a baseline. You need to come up with the rankings, and here we are. And
Yeah.
yeah, people can come up with their own rankings and systems and defend it. That's fair. Um, but you got to start somewhere because guess what? Not every player in the NFL today is going to be in the Hall of Fame.
And you can check this all out at nonhalloffame.com, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame active monitor. And you can see sort of how I came up with this. This will change as we go. Uh, For example, though, one thing that has already changed already, as I've already done the top 100, Paul and I are only going to go through the top 30. Davante Adams is ranked here, but he just now retired. I'm not plucking him out because then I have to change everything else.
Yeah.
But also, that's sort of a good segue because with pro football, it's not the same as in other sports. Sometimes our legends don't go out great. They're hanging on. I mean, we're going to be talking soon in a couple of years, you and I and our group, about Adrian Peterson. Is he even officially retired yet? I think it took him a couple of years before he actually did. So I've got a lot of free agents on this.
Yeah, and some of them could yet come back in, especially if they just retired or not retired, but they're not on a roster as we speak today, the beginning of the 2025 season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, increasingly the likelihood is if more games they don't play or they're not on a roster
Right.
this year and the next year, it's very rare to see players come back after multiple years. But you're right, and we've got a number of players who have retired like in the last 12 months. And it's possible. I mean, things happen during a crazy season, and we've seen players take a year, even longer, and get picked back up. And then they may not do much, but they're on a roster, which means their Hall of Fame clock goes back to zero again until they
Absolutely.
retire.
Right.
So they delay that kind of in the queue for the 5-year eligibility wait that they're all going to 5 seasons that can't be on an active roster. That is their kind of waiting period, and it can be reset very quickly.
And the other thing, too, that I want to make very clear, this is based on what they've done, not what their potential is.
Right.
So, for example, we're not going to be talking about them today because we're only doing top 30. I've got Joe Flacco higher than some younger quarterbacks. Joe Flacco is not getting in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But what Joe Flacco has accomplished,
Yeah.
I would love to do a deep dive, you and I, on Joe Flacco at some point. So it's based on what they've done and what the book is already there. Potential doesn't get you in. But then you have to be conscious too of the Terrell Davises of the world,
Right.
the Basellis of the world. So part of also what I do is focus on a 5-year peak period. So, all right, let's get started. Ironically enough, or coincidentally enough, as more accurate, the first two players are actually free agents who will probably never play again. At number 30, David Bakhtiari, offensive lineman. I don't think he's going to be playing again. His peak period's 2016 to 2020, all with the Packers. Never did get a whole lot of Pro Bowls, probably should have got more. One of those guys who was floating under the radar, kind of our offensive Lavonte David, I've got him at 35, by the way. So okay. Bakhtiari, his career looks to be over. I don't think he's going to be coming back. Thought he had a phenomenal career, and right now, but he hasn't retired yet. I have him at number 30 overall.
Yeah, and he's at one of those positions we talk about all the time, right? And there's a handful of them that an interior and offensive linemen are just in that group that just don't traditionally have just not gotten as much attention from the voters. I'm not saying they sort of rank the position down, but we look at the voting results and you look at how many pure interior offensive linemen in the modern era, let's just say since the beginning of the Super Bowl, just to draw a line, that group, because things were different offensive line play before that. It's a tough position to get in. There aren't a lot of pure guards in the league or centers. And the ones that tend to get in have these like spectacular profiles of all decade and multiple first team. And you're right, some of the juice gets enhanced if they have a championship. It kind of adds to all of that. And that seems to be a position where there's like a top tier in an era. And if you're not in the top 2 or 3 of that decade/era when you play, it's really tough to get in. And even though a player with a great career and checks off some of the boxes, probably going to be tough. But that seems about right where he would sit.
Okay. Well, I told you that the first two are free agents. And this is the only special teams player we're going to be talking about. Uh, oh man, somebody who was cheering against the Ravens last a couple nights ago. That's Justin Tucker. Uh, I will go on record. I have gone on record many times that in my lifetime, Justin Tucker is the best kicker I've ever seen. More Pro Bowls, more first team All Pros. I think only Gary Anderson, I could be wrong on that, has as many as he does. Currently holds the record for the longest field goal. I've also gone on record saying that's going to be broken this year.
Yes. Hey, we saw it broke in the preseason, although that doesn't count. But it goes to your point. Kickers are getting better, and special teams are getting better, and coaches are willing. It's such a way across the league, and not every. As we saw this past weekend, not every team has a great kicker, but many of them do.
Right.
You get a team that gets close to midfield, and they're end of a half, particularly, right, or end of the game. It's not absurd for a coach to go for it now at that kind of distance where we never saw it, because these guys, a lot of them have the accuracy and leg to say, hey, it's worth rolling the dice under the right circumstances. Yeah.
And I think he was that evolution of players. And I think when you tell the history of place kickers, you can't eliminate Justin Tucker. But as our good friend Ron Katz sort of pointed out, because I was doing sort of like a Twitter countdown, Adam Vinatieri didn't get in first ballot. And Adam Vinatieri is far more iconic than Justin Tucker, even though I think Tucker was the better overall performer. Yeah. Saying that, Vinatieri has that iconic snow kick in the Tuck game, super clutch, and Tucker's probably known now more for a happy ending at request.
Yes, yeah. So there's some challenges there on that resume, I guess you want to call it. But you're right, because
let's say there's a stain.
Yes, we could go that way with that. But you pointed out, right? We only have 2 pure kickers in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and we know that Adam Vinatieri, who in 2025 on that ballot was his first year, he got to the final 7, so we know he's in the queue. He's on the brink. He's going to get in the next few years. But that doesn't mean that the door is going to open to the Hall of Fame and the voters are going to put a bunch of kickers in. So he has that challenge. Now, I agree with you. From his era and from the time period we're looking at, he has a legitimate case. But it's already hard enough for a kicker to get in. And yeah, we know the voters. We've talked about this length the last few years, because it's affected some players who have really strong credentials, playing credentials, is they're not supposed to consider the off-the-field distraction kind of stuff. But the way he left the team, and then his last season wasn't very good last year.
It wasn't good. No, it was terrible.
It's kind of a thing where it's easy for voters to kind of push that case back, and just sort of like
maybe something was on his mind that might come out,
Maybe he was slightly distracted.
Yeah. And it's a shame too. We see all these ones sort of like hide behind the facade of the family man, which is sort of like why not we. I could care less what Tiger Woods, but that's society, right? But nevertheless, I will go on the record again. Justin Tucker was the greatest kicker I've ever seen.
Yeah,
and too bad. 28. I only have one safety. And safety have a hard time getting in as it is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I think it's just more just in terms of there just aren't a lot of great veteran safeties right now. But it's Arizona's Budda Baker, who's still technically in his prime. I've got his peak period from 2020 to 2024. He's still rattling off Pro Bowls like crazy. I don't have any other safety ahead of him by any stretch. Saying that, you and I both know the safety bar is pretty high.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we were talking about a few minutes ago with the interior linemen, guards, and centers. That it's just a position that for decades the voters really just didn't give as much focus to. Now, in the last several elections, they have made up a lot of ground, right? We've had senior elected Kenny Easley
Hmm?
and some others. We started to see the era of the 2000s and the 2010 safeties, that are starting to get in. The big names that we think about, Ed Reed and Tony Pomalu and guys like that. So there is that recognition. So they've made up a lot of ground. But I think we're in that kind of phase right now that we've got some young early career safeties, I think, in the league right now.
Yeah.
And if you say we're not going to project them, but we're in this lull when we look at current recent safeties to say who would be that guy. And we still have some safeties that have been on the ballot that will continue to be on the ballot. And some of we talked about, Darren Woodson is up there. Um, and we got a couple more that are in that queue. They're modern candidates. So if there's gonna be safeties taking up the voters' attention in the next several years, it's probably Rodney Harrison and Darren Woodson. And when these guys become eligible in the future, it's going to be tough for them to find a space in the debate.
Yeah, and that's sort of like what I'm looking at here. I'm a huge fan of virtually everybody I'm sort of like going to be rattling off, but I also sort of like have to keep in mind their position and how that sort of like plays off. And it's sort of funny here as we're going from Buddha. Well, actually, no, that'll be two more from now. Our next one, 27. Somebody who did what Jason Kelce didn't do. He's a two-time champion, and that's Lane Johnson. I've got also what I do on peak periods, by the way. I will do a 5-year thing and I will split them among 2 or 3 or 3 or 2, depending on how it sort of like plays out, just if you're injured or whatnot. So Lane Johnson is sort of always in Jason Kelce's shadow. How can he not be? It's a giant shadow, but now he's I believe 6-time Pro Bowler. You can't think of that offense without the offensive line that did win a Super Bowl without the most dynamic figure.
Yeah.
And Lane Johnson's also still there, still producing, 35, still dominant.
Yeah, and we said earlier, right? I mean, quarterbacks benefit, right or wrong. Probably the greatest was championship or a Super Bowl win.
Yep.
And for the other players, less so. But for the other players, it does sort of get on that resume.
Yep.
And it may not be enough to push them to the top. It's not going to be the strongest prep. The All-Pro selections to Pro Bowl and All-Decade are probably going to be key for a position of offensive lineman. That's what's going to build their resume. But as this team moves forward, this dynasty that we're currently seeing, he could benefit even more as that team has other success. And voters may very well look at him when he does get retired, look at that and say eventually, if it was a running dominant offense and he was a big part of that and they win the championships, he could very well start to get, it may take a while, but he's the kind of player that could start to get attention from the voters if they're looking at offensive linemen, which they would eventually, in the overall scheme of the players that looking at the ballot. I think he's a guy who could benefit by continued success and high profile success of the team.
Okay. Well, we talk about quarterbacks.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. And
there aren't enough quarterbacks in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
No, there's not. But nothing but, again, you said it, I said it. You win it all. It doesn't, quarterback X wins Super Bowl and there's 30 publications saying why they should be in the Hall of Fame. And here's one of them when that happened. The Rams went all in, traded for Matthew Stafford, dealt Jared Goff. Both teams actually benefited. Here's Matthew Stafford. He's now, I believe, 2 days ago, as we're recording this, joined the 60,000 yard club. And I know that you and I, when we're thinking about Hall of Famers, probably don't think of Matthew Stafford in that category. I know that I don't, but I can't discount a Super Bowl champion quarterback with 60,000 yards. I can't do it. And he's still producing. He's still good. He's still compiling. And I don't always like the word compile, but I can't discount it either. I've got him right now at number 26.
I think that's a fair slot for him. And I think, as you alluded to, he just crossed that barrier, the 60,000, which I think puts him seventh all time or eighth all time, one of those two
He's
positions.
in the top 10.
Yeah, and if he has an average season and stays healthy, and his health has been an issue the last couple of years, but if he can play out this season, he's going to move up that ranking
Yeah.
a little more. Now, there's another guy we're going to talk about here eventually who's also up there, and I think we talked about this on Twitter not too long ago. He has a very unique resume. He has two things. He has that Super Bowl, and he was a big player, big part of that team. And then he has what you just referred to. He's built up the passing yards. So if we go back and look at the history of voting decades long and the voters and how they look at that, those are two strong check marks on a quarterback's Hall of Fame resume.
Right.
So in that sense, you're like, yeah, you've got to consider that he's going to be someone who deserves attention. But the voters, and we haven't seen it yet, but their mentality is going to have to shift a little bit because he had a couple seasons where he was top three in some of the key quarterbacks' seasonal stats, but he was never viewed in any season as a top three quarterback.
Right.
He made one Pro Bowl. He has never been an All-Pro, first or second team from any of the major organizations to give out those postseason honors. And I did some kind of rumbling looking at where he sits in the top 10. There's a whole bunch of his peers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at his career, and we got some overlap, but if you kind of pick that his career, and it's been a long career, and you look at who else played during that era, a good chunk of it, he might sit, seventh or eighth, conservatively, the best quarterback in that era. Now, the Super Bowl helps elevate him a little bit higher, I think, in some people, because not all of those have that. So it makes you wonder, like, how many quarterbacks from an era, and they dominate the pass. Like, if he ends up in, say, sixth overall, but if 8 of those top 10 sorry, the other 7 of the 8 are his peers, our voters are going to have to reevaluate what that looks like.
I think it's also different than when you and I were in our 30s, right? So back when you and I were in our 30s, but seriously, Trent Dilfer is a Super Bowl winning Super Bowl. Yep. Brad Johnson, those two guys, two game managers who just go out there and don't screw up. You can't have a game manager win a Super Bowl now in this era. Stafford's not a game manager.
Yep.
And I think since it would be fair to say 2010 or in the early 2010s, that if you don't have a top 10 or at least top 12 quarterback, you can't win a Super Bowl. You could for a little while.
Yeah.
Stafford won in this era where I think you've got to be in that aerospace. I mean, people forget, we talked about Joe Flacco before, who we're not going to be talking about, but Joe Flacco was in that 8 to 12 spot for a long period of time. And here he is still playing, and the guy he beat, who was supposed to still be here, Colin Kaepernick. And I'm not going political, guys. I'm not, but let's be honest. When we looked at that Super Bowl, if we would have said, hey, Joe's still going to be playing it as a starter and Colin's out of the league.
Yeah.
No one would have bought that.
Well, yeah, it's a quarterback league. It has been for a while, but I think you're right. It's even more so. And in a guy like Nick Foles, you get kind of an oddity, but that's probably going to be even more rare. And you're right. I mean, if you look recently, you really have to be a contender because you're going to play other teams who have top quarterbacks. And, Lamar Jackson is going to lose to a guy like Allen, right, with the Bills. Josh, that's the kind of league we're in right now. You need to have the heavy guns and match up with the other heavy guns in the long run, because if you're going to be successful enough, right, to get through the season in the playoffs, you're bound to run into, top quarterbacks. And if you're not in that top tier, you can be a really good quarterback, and we've got several in the league who seem to have all the skills and stats But unless you're in the top and you can consistently perform that way, it's going to be really, look how tough it's been for Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson with a guy named Pat Mahomes in the same conference. I mean, that's the
Absolutely, yeah.
heavy guns, and they haven't been able to. They're going to get there, but they haven't overcome it yet. That
Yeah.
just kind of shows how tough it is.
Well, and as we sort of like go up this, pretty much once we get to the top 10, they're already in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next group of people have a bit of work to do. Another offensive lineman, someone who's sort of flying under the radar because of who he plays for, Indianapolis, offensive lineman Quenton Nelson.
Hmm.
Still in his peak, just piling up dominance. A big reason why you can have sort of like quarterbacks, at the shoe. And I don't think he gets enough due.
Yeah. That's certainly been an issue, right? Relatively smaller market.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it tough. But you can only overcome that if you have a great quarterback and your offensive line kind of, or a great running back and your offensive line kind of picks up some of the hype and the PR around all of that, and you win.
Mm. Yep.
And otherwise, you're exactly right. I mean, there are people who watch the game who are evaluating, and the guys who are making decisions on All Pro and their input on the Pro Bowls recognize him. But it's very much harder for a lot of people to assess him because of exactly the situation we've been talking about. He doesn't have all those other benefits, so to speak, and it can easily be overlooked and forgotten at a position that's already underrated. We kind of mentioned that by the voters.
Yep. My next two are wide receivers. So at 26, DeAndre Hopkins for Baltimore, who had that amazing touchdown catch just 2 days ago.
Take that, OG Beckham.
Well, we will not be talking about Odell. He's down on the list.
I meant the catch.
I will still maintain that Odell Beckham's catch there on that Monday night game is the greatest catch I ever saw. Period.
From a talent point of view,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be up there.
Yeah. And for his first 3 years, yeah, they're right up there. He's still looking for work, but we're not going down that thing. But DeAndre Hopkins, though, at one point, unlike Odell Beckham, again, who we both madly respect, but DeAndre Hopkins was a WR1 in the league at one point. Odell was not.
Yeah.
DeAndre's still looking for that Super Bowl championship. He could get that with Baltimore. Davante Adams is with the Rams for the first time this year. Has still shown that he didn't need Aaron Rodgers. Still got 1,000 yards last year. I think a lot of people don't remember that, but he did. So I've got them 25 and 26 respectively. Adams 25, Hopkins 26. I could easily flip that.
Yeah, and I think both of them are at that precipice, right? They're at that edge, you know. And again, it's not a perfect measure because there's a lot goes into evaluating. But if you just want to kind of look benchmarks, at the receiver position, and the hole needs more wide receivers. No, there's a lot, and there's a current lot in the jam. We'll get to that in a minute. There's a lot in the log jam already on the ballot.
Oh yeah,
but it gets very hard, even in this era we just talked about, post 2000, where these guys are putting up huge numbers. It gets very hard to ignore a player who's going to get 1,000 or very close to 1,000 receptions, right? He gets, moves up fairly high on the career yardage, and he's got 80, 90 or more receiving touchdowns. Now, both these guys are in that kind of time frame. Either they're, and that means you just can't ignore that. Even though, yeah, a lot of their peers are in that group, they are kind of separating themselves up that list. And yeah, the numbers are maybe less stunning than they would be if they were putting those numbers up in the 90s and early 2000s. But you get to a point where the voters' eyes just can't look away, and they're going to have to evaluate. And if these guys end up on the same ballot, it'd be interesting to see how voters, because we have a logjam already from guys from the 90s, into the 2000s that are stuck there, and some of them have very similar numbers. Some of them have some more career accomplishments than these two particular receivers, and we already know that creates a log jam, more so now that we're electing fewer modern the Hall of Fame candidates. So, but like I say, they're at a point where you just can't ignore them.
Mhm.
The numbers are there. And the peak years, as you said, for both of them are there.
No, absolutely. I made a prediction on another show that, sometimes to do shows without you.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You're
I
going to hear from my lawyer.
I don't have one, so
Okay, sorry, you're going to hear from my agent.
oh, okay. I don't
I
have
thought I
one
had an
either.
exclusive contract.
There you go. I made a prediction that I think San Francisco is going to run away with the division. And a big reason I said that is because of who I got next here. Fred Warner.
Yeah.
He's number 2 in all of the interior linemen. I think he's been an absolute beast, a quiet beast who people don't give enough respect to. Brought the Niners to 2 championship games, didn't win them, but here he is. If he's healthy and if he stays healthy over the next few years, you can't keep him out.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No, you're right. I mean, he's
22, 24 overall. Sorry.
yeah. And we're starting to move up this list where you're seeing future candidates who have a really, really strong case.
Mhm.
And here's an example of a guy who we think is getting closer to the end of his career, but is still really a high
Still in
performing,
his
high
peak.
achieving player, which we've talked about this. Sometimes you see a bit of a fall off those last few years. And at the end of the day, it often doesn't impact the overall assessment because the peak years are there. But it is, interesting when you see a guy like this who could very well end up retiring with very little decline in his play and achievements. He may not be at his best, but he's not far off it these last few years.
So he's got a teammate up next, and I might have this wrong. I keep going wishy-washy on this. It's our first running back we're talking about in Christian McCaffrey. I think Paul, how much I love dual threat running backs.
Yep.
And what McCaffrey has done when he's healthy is Roger Craig plus. Saying that, he's not always healthy. And McCaffrey, who is just this amazing physical specimen, I don't know what he would need to do. If I compare him to Roger Craig, another former 49er, who always seems to be on the outside looking in, and I still have Craig higher than McCaffrey. I don't know if you do at this point. What does he have to do?
Well, you hit the proverbial nail on the head. He's got to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because what he has done early in the career and for those seasons, it was fantastic. I think he is a prototype, not that it's new in the league, because we've had running backs who could really be a significant impact and put the numbers up in receiving. The league has had those for many decades. But when you see someone like that who can put all that together in a package, it is relatively rare. But as we've been talking about, it is part of the evolution of the running back position in pro football the last few decades. So he will be, a good example of that and probably one of the top performers. So as voters begin to reflect on running backs that are increasingly important in the receiving game, he cannot be ignored for what he achieved. I think if he manages to get through the season and either this year or next, and the team gets to the Super Bowl, he may not have to be the best running back in the league, but if he's a serious contributor and threat on those teams, that's going to help his case as well. So health, and I really think in his case, because he's not probably going to have a long career and put up some huge numbers that we associate with running backs. We've got a couple of those in the game right now already, a young one and an older one. I think he's going to he would be health as much, but the championship would probably really help if he didn't have to be the MVP of the game, but if he's a major contributor, that would help his resume, I think.
He reminds me of John Riggins. Sort of like one of those guys who, when you look at his overall career,
Yeah.
there's a lot of ebbs and flows. And when John Riggins was healthy and at his peak, no one could touch him. But when he wasn't, he
Yeah.
was not even in the top 20. And
Yeah, and
McCaffrey,
he's a guy that if you take out a peak season and you take out that iconic Super Bowl,
yeah,
if you took that out of his resume and then looked at the rest of it, yeah, you would say, what are we talking about? Hall of Fame? What do you mean?
yeah. And so moving on, so to number 22, it's the only cornerback I have.
What?
What? Corner?
I'm, I'm just kidding. I thought we got a ways to go. There's only one of them.
Yeah, I only have one. Maybe I'm missing something
Oh,
in that. Then by all means, tell me. Uh, First year in Pittsburgh, Jalen Ramsey.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the only person I've got right now in the who has a Hall of Fame push. I mean, I know we were looking at Sauce Gardner at some point, but he's only in 4 years, so he's not here yet. There's still so much work to do. Patrick Surtain is another one, of course, but this is the only one. Again, for all those, it's not about potential. That's what you've already done. So let's just say your legs get chopped off by Apocalypse Now helicopter. I don't know. I've been seeing someone's tweets that I shouldn't have.
Yeah, and I think he is another type of example of a player we can look at who had a peak, has that championship, has that kind of mid-career lull, right? He was a
Yeah.
big free agent, made a move, didn't really work out so much. Now he's in a position where maybe he can recapture some of that profile, some of that key role on a defense, on a team that's trying to be a serious playoff contender. So he's a guy who has like an opportunity to, I guess, improve his closing story or his closing argument by finishing up a career on a higher note than maybe it would have been if we looked at the last
Mhm.
few years. But he does have this consistent kind of view in the league, right, as being a top veteran, skilled cornerback.
Absolutely.
And that's that he's got his hat on that, and that's gonna in his era, that's gonna make him someone the voters are gonna look to. And I wonder, like we were talking about the safety position, whether he's also benefiting because we think like the safeties, there are a lot of young cornerbacks who we're not going to evaluate because it's way too early that are coming. And so he's kind of has a little
Right.
niche there where he's still in the league as a veteran, and but he's at kind of that top of that grouping of credentials of a veteran cornerback who we could say, yeah, this guy has a legitimate case for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's sort of how I feel about Jalen. Big fan of his. Uh, I'm such a big fan of what Tomlin's got defensively. I made a prediction. You can see that on the Not an All In show. You've been a guest on that,
Yes.
where I say Pittsburgh's going to have a winning record. Not necessarily because of Aaron Rodgers, but because I believe in Tomlin and the defense around him, which segues perfectly
Here we go.
to number 21, Cameron Heyward.
Ah, yeah.
One of those guys, Paul. I love guys who just sort of like fight their way through and then all of a sudden, oh my God, they're 30, now they're good.
Yeah.
And Cameron Heyward's that guy. A Pro Bowler last year, I think he was 36 last year, former Walter Payton Man of the Year, which some people will put some stock into that, some people won't. I kind of do. I think it's a pretty good thing to be a high character guy on a team. And Cameron Heyward just keeps chugging along. He just keeps leading a defense. He is that leader by example. Doesn't matter whether you're running a football team or running a factory. You want a guy like Cameron Heyward as your foreman.
Yeah, and I think he's an example of another type of candidate we look at in terms of players current in the league who has really made a late push. I think a lot of it is like I think you indicated this, right? He's getting the attention. He's getting people looking at and reevaluating him as a player in his career. Now that perhaps weren't having that conversation a few years ago. But now people are looking at him and he's coming back and he's contributing. And people are starting to reevaluate his case. Now,
Hmm.
he's gonna not necessarily have check off all the boxes, but you start getting that media attention late in your career. People get to know you and they're talking about you.
Offensive
And
Andrew Whitworth.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And it raises your awareness among the media and the voters, which can only help when they become eligible, rather than a player who just sort of never gets talked about and forgotten about. And it is great to see a player finally getting recognized, towards the end of their career for what they're able to do, and people now acknowledging, and yeah, he's a guy who is kind of putting himself in the debate. So,
Okay, so we have only two more wide receivers. The number two wide receiver, number 20 overall, he actually went down despite being younger than the person ahead of him. Someone who I think is on paper, not on paper, just on field, more talented than anyone else, but he's got a lot of off-field issues. He's a Miami Dolphin right now, as we're recording this on September 9th. He may not be when this goes live. Tyreek Hill, a WR1 in the league for maybe 2 years. Somebody, when the Kansas City Chiefs traded to Miami, it's like, oh God, how's Patrick going to handle this? Well, they both handled it perfectly fine. Last year was his first time where it was like he was mortal.
right.
And I'm not going to speak so much about the off-field stuff that he has. Other stuff came up this week, unfortunately, for Tyreek. I can't say it's a surprise. It's sort of been dogging him his entire life. But when Tyreek is on, there's no one better. But now he's 30. And when you're a skill position, unlike a Cameron Heyward, where sometimes when you're in those defense, where you're in their trenches, you get that second life. You generally don't.
Yeah.
As a wide receiver. And his candidacy fascinates me more than anyone else. He's also a man who, and I don't know if you put any stock to this. Maybe you don't, maybe you do. I don't know how I put stock into this one, actually. His peers had him as number one in the NFL 100 going into last year, or I think it was last year, I believe. Tyreek Hill's biggest enemy is Tyreek Hill.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Kirk, when you asked me to come on and do this with you, I was thinking earlier today, not that I was doing a lot of research or studying for this, but his name popped in my mind immediately as an interesting candidate to be talking about.
Yeah.
Because you really did. I mean, there was a time there, both as a kick returner and as a young wide receiver playing in Kansas City, and the peak is so high there, and the All-Pro selections and the numbers and stats are overwhelming in that first few years of his career.
Right.
And then to get traded and have still maintain a level, at least initially, with the Dolphins. And everything seemed to be in place there. Now, I don't know. Because you're right. We see receivers, and we mentioned one earlier that I'm not going to repeat his name, have this sort of like Mount Everest kind of career, right? They come out very quickly. They hit that peak. It's a good peak. They put some good numbers up for a few years, whether it's injuries or whether it's other distractions or age or whatever it might be. They fall off that peak very, very quickly, maybe as soon as their late 20s. And like you say, once they seem like they're going down that slope of declining performance, the stats aren't showing it. They're not having the same kind of impact. They're not being forgotten, but people just aren't talking about them anymore as being one of the top receivers in the game. It's very hard for running backs in some cases and wide receivers to kind of overcome that. And you look at him and you wonder, is he going to turn it around? Or are we seeing a progressive decline in his impact, and it's going to kind of fizz out? I don't know, but history would seem to indicate that might be what we're looking at, because it's rare for someone at that skill position to stay healthy and have an impact When you
Right.
start seeing multiple years of decline, it's really hard to turn it around. And then you're left with a peak, a short peak that you have to try to evaluate and won't have the total career numbers and other credentials that you would expect in a package. So then it becomes a very different debate for
I'm
the
hoping he
voters.
turns this around. I don't know where he's going to wind up. Uh, Hopefully with the contender, and hopefully he can straighten out a lot of things because he's had issues since he got out of college.
Yes.
With women, with other things. I don't want to go in that here. Talent field. I mean, that's why I said for a 2 year period. I think the first 2 years in Miami, he was the WR1 of the league. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
Uh, well, let's see what sort of happens moving forward. And moving forward, it goes back to a position that will get maybe more credit than they should. Going back to quarterback for the next two, and at 19 and 18 respectively, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, both in completely different spots in their life. Josh Allen just showed everyone last weekend why he was the MVP. Russell Wilson showed everyone why he's Donovan McNabb 2.0. Allen, I'm a fan of both of these quarterbacks. I just said this 6 hours ago to somebody that if Russell Wilson or just like handed it off to Marshawn Lynch, you and I, we've said this before, you and I.
Yeah.
He could very well have been a back-to-back Super Bowl champion.
Yep.
And would have been there. Pete Carroll should get more blame than that, but ever since that point in time, I know Russell Wilson was a Pro Bowler last year, which makes me question Pro Bowls.
Which you should, because
Yeah,
a lot of guys are getting him, and I'm sure I know the voters are putting less faith in the Pro Bowls.
I put that in this whole thing too, right? Like
Yeah.
you compare that to those in the past. He's got 10, and is Russell Wilson deservingly a 10-time Pro Bowler? No.
Yeah.
I have him still slightly ahead of Josh Allen because he did win the Super Bowl. Saying that, Russell Wilson keeps dropping. He was a top 10 guy on my list for, let's see, let me tell you where I had him actually in the last few years. So he went from 19, 17, 10, 11, 13, and now 18 this year. So he's
He's heading
dropping.
in the wrong direction.
Yeah, he's heading in the wrong direction, which generally you don't do because people
Yes.
usually ahead of you are retiring.
Yeah.
And are falling off the list completely. The narrative on Russell Wilson is changing completely. The narrative on Josh Allen is incredible as ever. But again, Russ has the title. I still think Russell Wilson, a lot of people will disagree with me on this. I have him as the best Seahawk of all time because of what
Wow.
I do. I truly do.
Well,
Obviously, you
when your
just screwed
quarterback
that one,
when
and
your
that's
quarterback
fine.
wins your franchise a Super Bowl, that gets him a lot of cred.
Marshawn Lynch is right now shaking his head at me.
Yeah, he probably
Marshawn, I
is.
love you. I love you. I'm pounding the pavement for you on the Hall of Fame, but
Yeah. So with Russell Wilson, I think the challenge he's going to face is people generally, sports media and the voters,
mhm.
are probably increasingly just going to forget about him because what he did so early in his career, and then the rest of his career has sort of been a roller coaster, and now he doesn't seem to be getting the same kind of traction, the same kind of interest. He's not even kind of treading water with. He's kind of bouncing around.
Yeah.
He's gonna, because of what he achieved, he's gonna be in the conversation. But I wonder whether the risk that he faces is kind of being pushed more and more in the background. And the reason why I want to describe it that way is because I want to talk to you about the other guy you just have right next to him. And that is a guy whose peak we're seeing, and the peak is coming.
Yeah.
And Granted, he'll probably play longer, obviously, and have longer career, and he won't be on the ballot as the same time as Wilson. But as we look into the future, you can see a guy like Josh Allen could really be someone who moves up all those stats. If he can win another MVP, a championship, again, an organization that that would bleed to death for a Super Bowl, right? In Buffalo, um, he's going to be that guy. So he's at that sort of point where that tipping point where you can just see it coming, and the greatness might he might end up being considered one of the greatest quarterbacks of his era. Let's say the post Tom Brady kind of picture of that. He is at that, along with Lamar and a couple and Patrick Holmes, obviously. But if he can get through that and win the Super Bowl, be a contender, it just seems like his potential we're just seeing, and history's being written. Whereas when you look at someone like Wilson, it's like the history was already written, and that was a while ago, and it's
Yeah.
kind of getting like pushed back
And
and pushed back.
he's about to lose his job in New York,
Yeah.
which
Then what happens? Like, sure, he'll go somewhere, but can he have an impact? Is he going to be a starter again? Is he going to be thought of as a top quarterback? Probably not. Maybe he gets a chance. There's so much uncertainty there.
Donovan McNabb 2.0.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot that the voters will look at, but will so much of his career be seen as sort of blah, flat, average, below average? That's tough to overcome as a quarterback. You want to see a quarterback, right, with a lot of success, a long career, or a couple multiple peaks or multiple championships. And a quarterback who gets one early in their career, we see the potential, and then it never really gets reached again, but it's a downward kind of slow slide, is a hard perception to overcome, I think.
It is. It is.
But his slot here is well deserved.
Well, it's going to get a lot easier. I think the next six will be things you'll debate, and as we move on the top, you'll just say yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. I can see it coming.
Yeah. Yes. All right, we got Chris Jones, Kansas City defensive tackle, still in his peak. Kansas City Chiefs you always talk about Mahomes and Kelce. They don't win this without Chris Jones. They're not the dynasty without Chris Jones. I think this is pretty much obvious to a lot of people. A lot of the people who were in the know, sure. Maybe not in the Swifty verse, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, last season that really became the predominant thought, right? The predominant view of things, right? Is that the Chiefs didn't have this in the last couple of years, the greatest of seasons, but were still very successful. And Chris Jones is a guy who got more and more, deservingly, more and more focus and attention for that. And for me, when I look at it, I mean, we can look at Pat Mahomes' career and Kelce's, and for a moment we can say, okay, let's say they won one Super Bowl. Let's say they didn't win any, but they're going to have all this great success. They're going to be all pros. They have a lot of stats, right? Maybe in a hypothetical world, they just didn't end up closing the deal in the playoffs. Everything else held equal. They're going to get in they would still both get in the Hall of Fame. Now, Chris Jones, it's a flip side. Like a good player, solid player, an impact player, but being a key factor in that successful run of the Chiefs and the Super Bowl really helps elevate his case.
Yeah, just absolutely dominant. I can't imagine that they win. I can't imagine that they even go to half of those titles without him. Somebody a little near and dear to my heart because he's a Saint, and I kind of hope that he doesn't stay a Saint because I want him to go somewhere else because I love him. Cameron Jordan. I've got him at number 14, defensive end. His peak is over at this point, but another high quality guy who just keeps putting up numbers after numbers, has done everything that you need him to do. I'm a huge fan of Cameron Jordan, but I worry though. I mean, I could easily rank Chris Jones higher because Chris Jones had sort of like that playoff success. Jordan has just done everything you can ask of him and more. But I maybe I got this wrong in my ranking. I'm perfectly willing to sort of admit that, but I don't know. I don't know what more he can do at this point. His peak is over. He's in his mid to late 30s. I would love to see him get a title. And I hate that saying as a Saints fan. Hey, please trade my favorite
Yeah,
player.
yeah, I know.
But you've been there,
Yeah.
right? So
You don't want to see it, but on the other hand, given the position, given where he's viewed among the peers at his position for his era, going somewhere and getting a championship would really be sort of the cherry on top of the sundae of the career that he's had, right? And it would make that debate about his resume.
right.
It may not be fair, but it is a reality that it would make people take a second closer look. And I know we're going to get people who are going to yell at us and say, listen, Super Bowls are team achievements. And you and I both agree. You need a good,
Sure.
solid team. But if you're a major player and a contributor, we just talked about Chris Jones. That's what we're talking about. Not just a guy who was on those teams, but was an essential part of that. And for Chris Jones not being a high profile quarterback, receiver, running back, that makes elevate his impact even more so. And you're right, we're talking about a guy here who kind of been behind the scenes, not maybe enough national profile, and getting a little more of that attention later in his career would help. And you probably have a little bit of a bias. You probably have him ranked a little bit high here,
I
but
very well might be.
I don't
I
think
admit
you're
that.
off
Yeah.
that far. I don't think you're way off. Because a lot of people do applaud, and people who watch the game and watch the film and evaluate players speak very highly of him. And so I don't think you're very far off, but I also think you're giving an honest assessment, even though you have him up
Trying
this high.
to. I'm
It's going to be
trying to.
tough. It's going to
Yeah.
be tough.
All right. Here's our highest ranked wide receiver. A bit of a surprise because he's the Frank Gore of wide receivers in a way. You already know who I'm going with. Has never been really considered a top 4 wide receiver, but he just keeps producing and is still producing. And at some point, let's hear it for the boy. Let's give the boy a hand. Why the hell was that song popping in my head? But it's true. Mike Evans, who I also made a prediction last week, will break Jerry Rice's record of consecutive 1,000-yard receiving yard game or seasons. Still a top wide receiver on a very competitive team. Mike Evans just keeps doing what he does. And one of my favorite Mike Evans moments would be when remember when Antonio Brown ran off the field?
Oh, when did that happen?
Oh, when he was a Buccaneer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike Evans is there trying to stop him, and it's just like, all right, whatever. And then the next series, he gets a touchdown. He just remains focused and does what he does.
Yep. Yeah, I remember
Member
that.
of the 100 touchdown club, which if I'm going to toot the horn of Sean Alexander for that, I got to do that for Mike Evans. Mike Evans is clutch when you need him. Is he the flashiest? No. Is he the best? No. Is he always there when you need him? Yes. And over and over and over and over and over and over again. I hold him in higher esteem than Frank Gore personally for what he does. And so that's why I've got him as the highest wide receiver. I flipped him over Tyreek Hill because I had Tyreek Hill higher than him last year. I don't know.
I think Evans is I was going to ask you how you maybe had him ranked a lot, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So I think he's a guy who's really.
I can tell you that if you want to know.
I can envision that he's made a huge jump, and it would make sense because I think prior to a couple of years ago, although we were impressed with his key role and
just like how did he do it? But no, I'll tell you that now, since I've got that up here. So 78 5 years ago, 58, 50, 35, 18.
Yeah. And that's because we look at that streak of those consecutive 1,000-yard seasons.
Yeah.
not to be ridiculous about it, but 2 years ago it was 9 seasons, right? And now it's at 11 seasons. He's playing in year 12. Um, and so all of a sudden, it may seem funny, but the difference between 9 versus 10 and then 11 consecutive seasons is a big deal. And
Mhm.
it puts him in that kind of conversation. Not that we're saying he had the career and the impact of the GOAT himself, Jerry Rice. And yes, we can all debate the fact that we're playing 16 and 17 games. Um,
Sure.
he was injured last year and he still got the 1,000, but it was in the 17th game, but he only played 14. But the year before, 17 games, he had 1,200 receiving yards. So, there's some legitimate numbers here. I don't, again, he's been seen as a clutch. He's been key in the playoffs. He's been a big part of that team. He's been with Tampa Bay all those years. There becomes a point where that level of consistency, where maybe you're not top five, but you've been in the 5 to 10 slot of receivers in the league, like so many years in a row with a variety of different quarterbacks. Let's point that out.
Hmm.
That can't go unnoticed. Does he have the accolades like the Pro Bowl and the All Pro that we would expect
No,
to see?
but
No.
doesn't have
Um,
to at this point.
but he's got some of the other boxes, and it gets to a point, and like Frank Gore, you can say, well, yeah, a guy was never, Frank never led the league in rushing yards, but he just plows through those number of years, stays healthy, plays long enough. Yeah, you can look at that and say, well, he kind of just hung around, but he hung around at a level high enough to put up some decent numbers. It gets to a point where, like, okay, maybe I don't view him as the top, in this case, receiver of the league, but you can't ignore the numbers and the stats. And he hits some of those numbers that you just like, well, yeah, those yardage and the career touchdowns just can't get ignored. Now I noticed, I just checked because I was curious. Last week he had 5 receptions for 51 yards. He's got some work to do, so let's see if he can pull off 1,000 yard season this year. But even failing that, he's going to get the notice of voters.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we have a lot of pass rushing glomming at this point for active players. Here's somebody that our group is really high of. I think Jack Silverstein and oh, I'm blanking on the other gentleman who's big on him too. But we're talking about Calais Campbell, who's now in with Arizona, back with Arizona.
Mhm.
I've got him number 12 overall. Another former Walter Payton Man of the Year, just someone who just keeps going and going and going and proving value and value and value wherever he goes. The only thing that I worry about with him is you get that vagabond status where you're going from team to team to team
Yeah.
to team. I think he's all pretty much almost a Hall of Famer right now. Once I get to this point, I think you're pretty close. But I can see the Hall sort of like pushing back on it because there wasn't that dominant year. And the dominant peak wasn't the same as a Jared Allen that we saw in his peak. What say you?
Well, I was just double checking. So 18 years, he's got 110 career sacks. He's got a couple of decent peak seasons of one season with 14 and a half, one season with 10. But it's interesting. He's a lot like we just talked about Frank Gore
Yeah.
and Mike Evans. I mean, he's a compiler. He's had an impact. He hasn't had a whole bunch of these seasons where he's seen as the most significant or sorry, most impactful pass rusher in the league. But he's consistent, had that impact long enough and been in the league. Now he's bounced around a lot a bit. I don't think he really has any kind of like iconic season or accomplishment. But pass rushers get a lot of credit. The Hall is electing a lot of these guys. And sacks is a stat that we maybe probably didn't give as much significance to, say, a decade ago. But now, whether it's current players or historical players, that impact and disrupting the passing game and the sacks, other ways we can measure that, is getting more and more attention. He's probably going to benefit from that. A question for him is when he hits that ballot, not only who was also on the ballot, but who are the other pass rushers? And will
Right,
he sort of
exactly.
get pushed down that queue a little bit because although he's got that consistency in the numbers, nothing else that really jumps out that perhaps the voters
Doesn't
would
have the
say,
sexiness that
yeah,
that we're going to be
yeah,
talking about with some of the people who are actually I have ahead of him.
yeah. I can think of a guy right now who in a lot of ways
Yeah.
looks similar, but there's just enough of distinction that he's going to get more attention than Campbell will.
Yeah, I think that I speak for a lot of our group. That we were big fans of Calais, and we'll see what happens.
I think he's also a guy who's gotten a lot more attention in the last few years and a lot more profile about his career. So we kind of talked that earlier with some other players, right? If you end up getting that attention towards the end of your career deservingly that maybe you didn't get earlier,
Mm.
it does kind of help raise your profile at kind of the time as you leave the game and hope that resonates when you become on the ballot. So,
All right. Well, we're going to our highest rated running back. I think you already know who that is.
I'm surprised you have it on the list.
Really? Oh, you tease me. From the Baltimore Ravens, Derrick Henry, who is just.
Now, where'd you put him?
I've got him at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 overall.
Okay, we'll revisit that once we work through the other 10. But for now,
Okay, well, and I said to you right before we started this, like if you think I got something wrong, tell me. I can take the criticism. And
I got to see the other guys above him first
okay.
before I
Well,
evaluate whether you got him
Derrick
too
Henry,
low.
just because he had some injury plagued seasons, as a lot of running backs do. And the the running back position has sort of fluctuated. Now it's sort of like back in vogue after a few
Yep.
years of like, hey, we're going to throw on almost every down. Derrick Henry is also a throwback. He's not one of those guys who's going to be a two-way running back at all. Like his percentage of receiving yards to rushing yards,
Yeah.
it's not Christian McCaffrey like. It's not going to be. Give me the ball. I'm just going to beat everybody up. And that's what he does. But Derrick Henry, him and Saquon Barkley last year, it was just like the running back is dead. Long live the running back. It was beautiful to watch. I loved it. I know you loved it. We never talked about it, but I know you loved it because I know you. Right? I just know how you sort of think about that. And last year, I thought was the year that probably put him in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And here we are in week one after that, and he's still doing what he's doing. I love this guy. I love everything about him. Maybe I have him lower than I should.
Well, we'll see
Yeah.
because I want to see who else. I know who's in the mix, but I want to see the order.
Yeah.
But Henry, yeah, I mean, I'll confess here and now to the entire world that uh, even after his 2,000-yard rushing season, I'm like, okay, that's great. But at that point, a couple of years ago, I would point out, there are guys who with 2,000-yard rushing seasons who are not in the Hall of Fame and have not made any progress moving up the ballot. Guys who played in the early 2000s, and so that wasn't a clincher for me. But last year, yeah, elevated that. We saw it again already this season. He reminds me a lot of the great Earl Campbell. That's kind of
Yes.
what I see. Not a different kind of build, but the idea is, I'm going to run over you.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to run over you, run through you, but if I can get through the hole or get to the edge, good luck trying to take me down. Now, I don't think he's a speedster, but he's got enough speed, but you got to haul that guy down. When he came in the league, I looked at him and I thought, this guy is, even though we've talked about kind of the de-emphasis with the running position in the running game, when he came in the league a number of years ago, I'm like, this guy is going to dominate the league as a running back. And we didn't see that initially. I think it was probably just because of this transition and people were still focusing on the passing game and not running, or people hadn't figured out how to use him yet, and for him to get familiar with the game and build a team around that. And clearly the Ravens have done that, right? They built that offense around him. Of course, they got a quarterback who can run just as well. So they got a double threat they're running as well. Of course, a quarterback who can pass the ball. So he's in the ideal situation. And I think in the last couple of years, he's really elevated his status.
Mhm.
And to be honest with you, I don't know what else his career might hold. I mean, a championship would be great. Um, Contending for another rushing title, which I think he can if he stays healthy because they use him and he's right offense for that. But I would, as of today, this is only a recent kind of revelation for me to look at him and go, he's in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I think everyone I've
Yeah.
got above him is. So
Okay.
maybe
So maybe you have him where he needs to be.
maybe, or maybe I've got it mixed up, and that's okay. That's okay. Well, his teammate is number 10, Lamar Jackson. And this might be a quarterback bias, and yeah, it is, because by all means, tell me, everyone, when a two-time MVP quarterback is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You can't. Because it doesn't happen. He very well could have been a three-time MVP. This might be the only time I'll ever say, maybe because I remember this in real time, that I actually believe that Lamar Jackson deserved to be first-team All-Pro quarterback and not be the MVP.
Yep. Yeah.
If I go by MVP, meaning like what you bring to the entire team and how you elevate the team. Because take Josh Allen out of the Bills, they're not in the playoffs. Take Lamar Jackson out of the Ravens, I think they could still make the playoffs last year. I truly believe that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a disrespect for any quarterback, including Lamar Jackson, to look at that player and say he's being elevated and he's being supported by another Hall of Famer on that offense, right? I don't think that is a negative comment on either Henry or Lamar Jackson. I think it's just reality. And we know there's a lot of other running backs, wide receivers that have benefited from quarterbacks, right? And vice versa.
Yep.
So it's a fair assessment of things. But your first observation is one that I would go to immediately. Like, once a guy gets two MVP, all Associated Press MVP award, consensus MVP, he's in. Like, yes, he can do a lot more of the career. I don't think either one of us look at him and say he's going to be in the top 10, maybe, of career passing. He's not going to put up those kind of numbers.
I'm not because of what he can do, but here's my question.
He's gonna be a threat as long as he's healthy. He's on a good, strong team, well coached. They're obviously at a peak, right? They are a Super Bowl contender again this year. They got to get over, well, like Buffalo, they got to get over the Chiefs, but they also got to get past the Bills. And, well, we're going to find out because eventually probably end up in the playoffs.
Both
so
Lamar and Josh, I was going to say, both Lamar and Josh, to me, both of them could supplant Dan Marino as the best quarterback not to win the Super Bowl.
Very, very possible. And Marino's case is built a bit differently because of who he was and the yardage and the stats he put up at a time when he did in the 1980s. But I look at a guy like Lamar Jackson and the two MVP awards.
Yeah.
The voters aren't going to dismiss it. They can't ignore that. That is something that it's a check the box twice, and you're like, yeah. And I also think he has an opportunity. We've talked a lot about this, you and I, and other groups in our Hall of Fame group. Like, what does it mean with a running quarterback, and how do we evaluate the history of that? We've seen several of them over the last couple of decades. Some of them are better passers than others. And he's elevated both parts of those games. But what he's done, unlike some of the folks we've talked about before, like a Michael Vick and McNabb and Randall Cunningham, to some degree, is he had a great success in a major contender, playing in the Super Bowl, and but at the end of the day, he's got those two MVPs. So he's a Hall of Famer.
And deservedly so.
Yes.
Well, okay, my next four guys are all pass rushers. So, do I put them all together here? Let's see. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. Number nine, Myles Garrett, Cleveland. I think once you win a defensive player of the year and it was close into that hunt, it's pretty hard to keep you out, even if your team around you stinks.
So now that I know who you've put where, I would be inclined to put him down a few, and I'd move the two guys we just talked about up.
Fair. Well, that's
And the only reason I say that is in Garrett, we have a guy, right, who's playing for a horrible franchise who
hmm?
doesn't seem to be able to figure his way out of the pit,
I can't believe he resigned.
which they've been in for decades.
Yeah.
And I'm from Ohio, so I hear a lot about it. Maybe they will, but they never seem to be able to overcome their own stumbles, mistakes, which they have a whole litany of
Maybe
them.
you're putting too much
Self-inflicted.
highlights on the depoy, but
Yeah.
could be.
And you know what he kind of reminds me of a little bit? And they're not quite the same player, but he does kind of remind me of DeMarcus Ware in the sense that okay, DeMarcus Ware played for the Cowboys, got to the playoffs, was a contender, defensive player of the year, sack leader, but he was missing that one element when he moved. He went to Denver, right? He came off an injured series, so the Cowboys didn't want to sign him to a big contract. And they thought he was on the decline, which everybody thought might be possible, but he was able to go to Denver, fit in on a rebuilt defense, and was a major contributor along with Von Miller in a Super Bowl win, and that kind of cemented his Hall of Fame career. So I think Mount Garrett's probably biggest challenge right now is who he plays for. And I feel bad for the guy because
So
he has had
Thomas,
quite a career and he's getting a lot of the accolades, but it's somewhat the shine is a little bit off the apple, and it's not, again, no judgment on him as a player.
fair
That
enough.
context of where you play, and guys overcome that, and maybe you will. But I think when you're ranking where he stands right now, yeah, I would put Henry and Jackson above him, but he is roughly where he needs to be because you mentioned as a pass rusher, what he's done is among the probably the best or second best.
I got three higher than him.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, let's see how that lays out because
Khalil
Garrett has
Mack.
is quite a talent at that position.
Khalil Mack. Well, the Chargers. His peak is already past, also, but
Mm.
he just keeps still chugging along.
Yeah, I think his challenge is, he's with his third team, right?
Yes.
And he had his peak early,
Hmm?
and then he went to the Bears, and he had a really good season there, and then for whatever reason, they moved on from him. So that's interesting. I think that's a really interesting debate that we'd have to dig into it when we have more time. Is the two of those guys and where they currently sit? I don't think you're wrong, but I think there's an interesting debate of the order there. Um, Matt kind of strikes me as that peak came early enough. He still has more to achieve. Was his peak high and long enough compared to Garrett? I don't know. I think there's a lot. Those two guys, there's still a lot to be determined.
Hmm?
They're there, the order of them, and then maybe you're putting them a little bit high, but not out of the realm of possibilities in that group, because the peak is there for both of them, and it wasn't just 1 year, right? Multiple years of the best pass rusher in the league.
Well, let's go high voltage. I got T.J. Watt, number seven, Pittsburgh Steelers, and someone who's still in his peak. Well, not technically in his peak, but someone who I think will join his brother JJ a lot quicker than the Sharp brothers in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. TJ is incredible at what he does. I've got him number 6 overall.
It seems about right. And I don't want to flog a dead horse, as the expression goes, but these three pass rushers we're just
Number seven
talking about,
overall. Sorry.
they're right there, right? That group, the three of them are right there, and it would be fascinating to debate. But I think what's even going to be more interesting is what the future holds.
Okay. And
Which
so
of those three will we see one of them separate from the others? And we don't know, right? It could be any one of them.
it could be, and the only one I have ahead of them is somebody who has other issues himself. So number 6 overall, number 1 pass rusher, Von Miller.
Yeah.
The only player that I can think of, and I could be wrong, who has a suspension for personal conduct, a suspension for PED conduct. And let's be blunt, the Pro Football Hall of Fame doesn't care about either. Von Miller 10 years ago was the toast of the town. Von Miller was the best at what he did. Von Miller can still now has one skill left, and he still does it very well. I don't know what he's got left with Washington. I'm not cheering against him. I like Von. I like him a lot. But the only thing keeping him out is if some people in that room sort of say, like, well, he got suspended for PDs. Well, he got suspended for domestic issues. That's the only thing that's against
Yeah.
him.
So a few things on Von Miller.
Like do am I right? Am I right having Von higher than
Yes. So here's my first point. Yes, because if we just look at these four guys, because they're all the same position, they have many of the same accolades, the numbers. If I look at those four, the guy that I'm putting in the Hall of Fame today is Von Miller.
Okay. Yep.
Today, right now, if you told me who of these four would you put in the Hall of Fame today, I'm going to say Von Miller. But I think you're pointing out a fact that I don't think he's going to be first ballot. I think people are going to ding him for what you just highlighted. We don't need to go over it again, but they're not going to be able to ignore what he did and the impact he had in the championship. I also think, and I'll go on a little bit of a a cliff here, of the four guys we are just talking about, he might be in the best position this year
win a Super Bowl.
To win a Super Bowl
Yeah.
or get to a Super Bowl. Now, the odds get better if we say, okay, let's give him 2 seasons. We don't know that. Right now, he's there now.
Mhm.
But and there's no guarantee, but if these four guys, who do we think could enhance, which we pointed out, the other ones don't have a Super Bowl. He's in a position, right, to really take advantage of the fact that even if he's a role player and he has minimal impact, but if he's in the playoffs, and if he's in a Super Bowl and he has any impact, right? He gets 1 sack or something, but he's there. He's the one that's going to make it even an easier lock for him. But so he's one where you could say the career is there. There's probably not much else to be added to it. And so I think you got him in the right slot, and I would agree with you in putting him above the 3 that we just talked about at that position.
Okay. Sorry, just 1 second here. Just gotta pause thing. Okay, so that brings us to our top 5, which I think will be pretty easy. I have one offensive lineman left at number 5, Trent Williams. I think he's in right now. We know that offensive lineman, it takes a little bit of time. It's not a sexy position. He's not one of those guys who puts himself out there, but tell me he's out.
Yeah, he's a guy who's played a long time, built up a lot of accolades at a high level and maintained that. And his profile, I think, in terms of people looking at him as a potential future Hall of Famer, has really risen in the last 3 or 4 years of his career. And he's still playing at an all-pro level, which is really rare for a player, any player in any position at that age and at that stage of the career.
Right.
And you hear great accolades about him without any real negatives. It's tough sometimes because there'll be other good tackles on that ballot. There's a bunch on the ballot now, but I think a few of them will clear the ballot before he ever shows up. And when he does, if it's in the next 5 or 6 years, if he retires soon, he's going to
Right.
be one of the best top offensive tackles on that ballot.
Well, I think also too the fact that he bettered himself with the misdiagnosis in Washington
Hmm.
still worked out in his favor that he was still a top guy.
Yep.
I think it's a great story. I think Trent should be a lock in the next his first 4 years of eligibility, and he's still there. So our last four, number four, well, everyone's favorite tight end, Taylor. No, not Taylor. Travis. Travis Kelce is he the best tight end of my generation? I think Rob Gronkowski is, but he's the most famous. Travis does whatever you need him to do. Travis is in decline. It doesn't matter. Travis has done everything you need. He's a Hall of Famer right now.
Yeah, and probably would have been considered a Hall of Famer a few years ago, right? I mean,
I think so.
you're right. He's not at the peak of his career. He's at the end of it. There were many, including myself, who wondered back several months ago whether he'd even come back this year. But he didn't play very well in that Super Bowl. I'm sure it left a bitter taste for him personally, the outcome and how he was perceived, his play was. And he wants to come back and try to, reestablish and kind of don't go out that way. He wants to have a good season here. But yeah, I mean, since the guy you just mentioned is no longer in the league and hasn't been for a
Mm.
few years now, the mantle has been handed over, and all the stats and all the achievements in the Super Bowl, and you have a team that's been so successful and has won multiple and been in multiple Super Bowls. It's gonna have an impact on other players. Now, again, it's raised his profile, but the stats and the achievements are warranted. It's all there,
Mhm.
and we can make fun of the whole Taylor Swift
But
thing.
dare I say though,
But
Paul,
yeah,
has anyone ever elevated a football position more, however it happened, than
yeah,
Travis Kelce?
to the general audience and folks who maybe didn't follow the game, and if
Mm.
they did, they would probably more historically go to a quarterback. That's just kind of where people's focus goes. But to have it to go to a tight end is really quite phenomenal. But the guy is just based purely on the field. Yeah, I would put him in the Hall of Fame today. So yeah, he deserves a high ranking.
As we would with his quarterback Patrick Mahomes at number three. Not even 30 as we're recording this.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. Three Super Bowls, 5 attempts. That's all I need to say. I don't need
Yeah.
to say anything more than that.
Yeah, he's not a quarterback where we would say, listen, he needs to play out a full career. He needs to end up top 10 in the major stats. He needs to get, more all pro. That's something we often look at a guy who's maybe when we think about length of career, maybe he's halfway through an average career or good career of a quarterback in terms of years played. Um, he may not play a long career, maybe he will. But if you look at a player like that, he's already done all that. And we've had this conversation about him a few years ago. I mean, I thought he was a fascinating case maybe 5 years into his career, maybe 6 years, right? Where if something happened to him after 6 years of his career that he never played again,
Hmm?
I thought we could have the most fascinating
Yep.
case in front of the voters to look at a guy who only played 6 years, but at such a high level that he could still be first ballot Hall of Famer. And he's added to it since then and doesn't have to do anything more. And maybe in an exercise like this in the past, he'd be number one. Nothing's wrong with him being number three.
And in a few years, when we keep doing this, he might very well be.
That's the craziest thing. As great as we think he is, and we think he's a Hall of Famer today,
Hmm?
his case might even be better 2 or 3 years down the road.
Well,
Who knows?
let me throw this out at you. So, like 2021, he was 47.
Yeah.
Like on my rank, and which is the only rank that I sort of like do here. But actually, he was number two last year. I flipped him with this guy, Bobby Wagner.
Well, good for you, because I think I think 100
Okay,
people.
thank you.
Yeah, because I think 100 people doing this exercise wouldn't do that. But you did. Because what you've done is you simply said, listen, I'm not going to get hung up on the fact that we have all these wide receivers and quarterbacks and high profile players that are getting elevated, and we think of them as Hall of Famers, and you're stepping back and looking at. I'm more interested in the quality of a guy's career, the impact he had, and how long he was the best at his position, right? Over the entire career. And in doing that, that's why you ended up with Bobby Wagner this high. And kudos to you. I might quibble with it. I can see where you're coming from. I see is why it's warranted. And yeah, we're at this level we mentioned a few guys ago that he's a Hall of Famer today.
Yep.
I don't care. He's not a high profile tight end or a sack rusher or a quarterback or a running back. For a guy at that position to dominate it for so long and have a peak that's like a long peak right up to the end of his career, which we think he's getting close to. Yeah, kudos to you for recognizing the little guy.
And you know what the amazing thing is? Your kudos means so much more to me than you can possibly imagine.
You
Because
what, you thought this was a little risky,
a
putting him
little,
that high?
a little bit. I mean, like our football group sort of considers you're the Sherpa, bringing us up sort of like the Mount Everest of what we think is Hall of Fame worthy.
No, I think it's a good selection. Good for
Thank
you.
you. Well, number one, there's only one person left. Uh, love him, hate him, but he's a Hall of Famer right now. A four-time MVP. It's Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know what the season's going to hold for him. I didn't have him throwing four touchdown passes with no picks in week one. I think I said this earlier, that Pittsburgh will have a winning season. But I more or less said that in spite of Aaron, more or less because I love the Pittsburgh defense and I love Mike Tomlin. But Aaron Rodgers, I get why a lot of people who are watching this hate the guy. I get why some of you love the guy. Doesn't matter whether you love him, hate him. If you're in that room and you're gonna have 50 distinct personalities who have dealt with Aaron Rodgers, some good, some bad, even if it's all bad, it doesn't matter. Aaron Rodgers is a Pro Football Hall of Famer right now with no debate. When Clark Judge puts out that thing at the end of it where it says, how long do we talk about each person? Aaron Rodgers, less than a minute. There's nothing.
Yeah. For me, it really comes down, if we just focus on the field, we agreed to that, which is fair. We should be just focusing on the field. To me, it's one basic achievement. It's all those MVPs. Like everything else aside, he's won a Super Bowl. He's had some great wins. He's going to move up he's moving up the career stats. All that is fine. But like we said for Lamar Jackson with 2, you get 4, the discussion is over. It really doesn't matter.
Same.
Yes, you would, in some degrees, you would look at a guy like Aaron Rodgers or a guy like, interesting enough, like Brett Favre, where you think, well, that was a great career, but it wasn't as great as it could have been because we didn't see the multiple championships, right? Not that we've seen in someone like a Joe Montana, for example. We don't see that, but it doesn't matter. You get that kind of level, that's where it is. What I think is very intriguing about Aaron Rodgers, again, let's stick to the field, is he could have went out last year or in the last couple of years really bad. I mean, things did not go well on the Jets at all.
No.
It could have been, and again, just think people on the field for a moment. It could have been like, the end of Johnny Unitas' career, where it just faded out after he got traded. But in Rodgers, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't know what we're going to see in him. I don't know what to expect. But it's got to be better than having left the game playing with the Jets for a year or two. I'm not saying it makes his case stronger. I just think it makes that final year, that final image, a little bit more palatable.
Well,
It doesn't change the debate. It just means it ends his career on a bit better of a note.
he's not in that Russell Wilson category either, right? Where if he sort of like lays wet farts in 3 different cities, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, again, it's a different situation, but it's like the Johnny Unitas. It really didn't matter.
Yeah.
How that career ended, didn't really matter. And I mean, people remember that, and I think it's odd to see him not playing with the Colts at the end of his career and struggling with the injuries and all of that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. People look back now, and Johnny Unitas, even today, I would argue was top 5 quarterback of all time. It doesn't change any of that narrative. And it's the same with Rodgers. We can say, well, the career maybe didn't end great. We would have liked to see another Super Bowl by a great quarterback. And we're not, but those 4 MVPs. And there's really not, there cannot be any debate. Yeah, there's love him or hate him. There's a lot of debate about the personality and his persona and his media and his podcast and all this stuff in the last several years.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't, it won't, it matters to a lot of people in the public and maybe in the bigger NFL and universal
Right,
things.
but for our purpose.
But in that room when the voters or 50 voters are talking about these guys, he's going to be a first ballot finalist. And you're right. There doesn't need to be any conversation because all somebody needs to do is say his name. And heck, if they want to say 4 MVP, that's the end of the conversation, people. You put him in. I don't care whether you're going to elect 8 moderns or 2 moderns. He's going to be the guy.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. With that, well, Paul, thank you so much for being part of this. I know it's sort of like I won't say last minute, but just sort of like I don't think you sort of like knew who I was going to like throw at you. So, which is also more fun for me.
So you know what would be a great exercise one time, and I didn't have time to do this, is
Sure.
how many NFL future Hall of Famers are in the league in any given season. So it'd be interesting someday to go back and just pick a handful of just random, right? Pick a couple random seasons. And if I had the time, I would have done this before this just to see where we are today with your list of what we think of the guys who are in the league, and we have a good sense of maybe what the number might look like. I'm always be curious to go back and pick a year like 1981 or 1997 or whatever, and just count the players in the rosters to see, are we in 2025, are we seeing what we think to be a above average number of eventual Hall of Famers, or it'd be interesting to see.
No, I like that. That's a good idea. Well, I'll close off with saying, if you've watched this, thank you so much. Go check out www.theusahof.com, United States Athletic Hall of Fame, where you can help us vote for who's going to be part of the United States Athletic Hall of Fame. Check that out because you're actually part of who decides all of this, right? I mean, like,
that's right.
It's all open vote, and majority rules. Oh my God.
Wow, what a concept.
An election that's real. Check out everything else that we do here in the Buchnerverse. And with that said, wherever you are, wherever you may be, make today count because it never comes again. Tally ho, everyone.